Hello and welcome to the Glasgow University History Society podcast, where today we are having a look at the most remarkable of revolutions, that is the Haitian Revolution. From 1791 to 1804, the people of Haiti, formerly the French colony of Saint-Domingue, fought a long and brutal war for freedom and independence. After being held in appalling bondage, the Haitian ex-slaves achieved final victory, having seen off three major European powers and defeated the French colonists. From this, they set up the first black republic in the New World, the second independent state in the New World, and have the distinction of having organized the only successful slave revolt in the Americas. The legacy of these achievements has been profound and continues to resonate strongly in contemporary politics. So today we're going to have a look at Haiti and its fight for freedom. So to start off with, perhaps we should have a look at what life was like in Saint-Domingue prior to the revolution, what society was like, and what factors led up to the revolution. Anybody have anything to say on that?
A lot of obviously colonial presence from the 1730s in Saint-Domingue, with the French occupying it as part of the French Empire. It was I think it was one of the biggest exporters for sugar, as well as coffee, indigo, and other resources. So obviously, it's a very naturally rich part of the world, and certainly helped with the increasing colonial globalization that occurred with the global economy and the development of it. I think there's a famous quote by a French historian, let me see if I can find it in my notes, Paul Fregosi, in regards to the Haiti as a rich country. He said that Haiti was hell, but Haiti was rich. So obviously that would exploring the sort of treatment of slaves, or the treatment of various slaves from Africa, from the West Indies, as well as mixed race people who they called mulattoes. I'm not sure. Apologies for the vulgar pronunciation of French, but yeah, I'm too anglicized to pronounce it any other way. But so obviously we get a sense that it is very obviously very unequal as a colony, but also very rich. So when the Haitian Revolution occurred, and when it was when Toussaint Louverture had consolidated his authority over Haiti, obviously that would have worked very well for the economy of Haiti thereafter. What do you guys think?
I think you make a lot of excellent points there, especially with the wealth of Haiti contrasted with its inherent inequalities. Because Haiti seems to be a powder keg of a society when under the French. Because you have a variety of separate racial groups and economic groups that are all competing with each other and all virulently despise each other. The main racial tension appears to be the Blanc Grand, or the big whites, who were plantation owners who were importing goods from France to run plantations and exporting the goods back to France to make maximum profits. Then you got small whites, who are laborers from France who came over to participate in the running of the colony without owning large stakes in it. So you get urban workers, you get managers of plantations, people who are in there to make enough money and get the hell out before they died of something like yellow fever. Aside from that, you get the free coloreds, who were members of the colony that were free, but non-white. So the free non-whites, they were allowed to own property, but their rights were eventually quite heavily restricted, not only by the innate prejudice of the white members of the colony, but also by enforced apartheid-style legislation, in part contributed by Moreau de Saint-Marie, who opposed the Declaration of the Rights of Man during the French Revolution to ensure that he could continue making profit off of slavery. And he came up with 128 distinct racial classifications, as far as I've been able to glean. So these people were oppressed by sumptuary laws that prevented them from wearing European-style clothing. They weren't allowed any representation in the initial colonial assemblies that were trying to run the colony without influence from France. And below the free non-whites, you get the slaves, which is the majority of Saint-Domingue's population. Unfree slaves imported from Africa in appalling conditions that were then forced to run these plantations, extraordinary rich plantations. And it was said from the the book Race and Nation in the Age of Emancipation, the life expectancy for newly imported African slaves was no more than 7 to 10 years.
Yes, it's interesting that you should mention the wealth of the colony. In the end of the 18th century, Haiti produced over 60% of all the world's coffee and 40% of all the sugar consumed by Britain and France, the two premier imperial powers. I believe it was C.L.R. James in his book Black Jacobins that described Haiti as not just the jewel in the crown of the French colonial empire, but the envy of all colonial nations. So now that we've looked at a little bit about the economy and the society in Haiti, perhaps we could look at the condition of slaves. Does anybody have anything to say about the life of these people, how they were treated?
Absolutely appallingly. I've actually got the book Black Jacobins up in the background at the moment, and they have an excellent description of slavery in that. For the least fault, the slaves received the harshest punishment. In 1685, the Code Noir authorized whipping, and in 1702, one colonist, a marquis, thought any punishment which demanded more than 100 blows of the whip was serious enough to be handed over to the authorities. Later, the number was fixed at 39, then raised to 50. But the colonists paid no attention to these regulations of the Code Noir, and slaves were not unfrequently whipped to death. The whip was not always an ordinary cane or woven cord as the code demanded. Sometimes it was replaced by the rigoise, or thick thong of cowhide, or by the lion, local growths of reeds supple and pliant like whalebone. The slaves received the whip with more certainty and regularity than they received their food. It was the incentive to work and the guardian of discipline. But there was no ingenuity that fear or a depraved imagination could devise, which was not employed to break their spirit and satisfy the lusts and resentment of their owners and guardians. Irons in the hands and feet, blocks of wood that the slaves had to drag behind them wherever they went, the tin plate mask designed to prevent slaves from eating sugarcane, the iron collar. Whipping was interrupted in order to pass a piece of hot wood on the buttocks of the victim. Salt, pepper, citron, cinders, aloes, and hot ashes were poured on bleeding wounds. Mutilations were common, limbs, ears, and sometimes the private parts, to deprive them of the pleasures in which they could indulge without expense. The masters poured burning wax on their arms and hands and shoulders, emptied the boiling cane sugar over their heads, burned them alive, roasted them on slow fires, filled them with gunpowder and blew them up with a match, buried them up to the neck and smeared their heads with sugar that the flies might devour them, fastened to nests of ants or wasps, made them eat their excrement, drink their urine, lick the saliva of other slaves. It is that's from Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James, and it just gives an overview of the horrific punishments and brutality that slaves faced under white rule in Saint-Domingue.
Okay, well, it's obvious that the conditions the slaves were held in were appalling, and it's not difficult to understand why they would need to revolt and to free themselves from this. The Haitian Revolution was instigated by other factors, for instance, the concurrent revolution going on in Saint-Domingue's mother country in France. So, does anybody have anything to say about how the French Revolution may have impacted the Haitian Revolution, particularly in regards to the ideals that the Haitians were engaging with?
Well, if you look at some of the art history from the Haitian Revolution, we see that there's one particular Haitian revolutionary, I think his name is Belly. He's standing in a tropical place, presumed to be Haiti, and he's also leaning on a bust of a French philosopher from the pre-French Revolution in the 1770s. His name is Rainal. So obviously we get a sense that many revolutionaries in the Haitian Revolution were actually quite enlightened individuals. So obviously they would take back a lot of the the French Enlightenment ideas from the French Revolution over to Haiti. So when the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen was issued in 1792, I think it was, obviously they would have, he'd have taken a lot of these ideas from there. So obviously in that declaration we see ideas such as the abolishment of slavery, and we see the idea of equality, fraternity, and liberty. And these people in Haiti would stop and think, so surely this is a universal idea, these Enlightenment ideas, and it would be highly hypocritical for the French to exclude their colonial subjects overseas. So why not them? And perhaps it could be said that these Enlightenment principles had sown the seeds to revolution in 1791 in Haiti. In fact, the French philosopher I named Rainal, he actually attacked slavery in the 1780s, just before the French Revolution as well. He said in his History of European Colonization that he warned, I quote, "The Africans only want a chief sufficiently courageous to lead them on to vengeance and slaughter." So obviously we get a sense here of both sides, that the European colonial perspective, that they're subordinated, and that in Rainal's claim I just quoted, it's quite unnecessarily vindictive, that they seek vengeance and slaughter. So they obviously have a view of the slaves over there as being quite savage, which is a form of oppression in itself. And at the same time, the Europeans are recognizing through these Enlightenment principles that it's universal, that this is going to extend overseas, that they're going to, it is the very early stages of decolonization during empire. So what do you guys reckon?
Definitely what you say about the Declaration of the Rights of Man as an influential document is absolutely right. You can't, even the French themselves recognize the hypocrisy of, you can't declare the rights of all men when Saint-Domingue is practicing brutal slavery. When the colony tried to send representatives to the National Assembly, their proposed number of delegates for the population of the colony was revoked because they tried to base it off of all people in the colony. However, that did include slaves. And so they were given sort of the ultimatum, well, you can either accept paltry representation in the National Assembly proportionate to the population of people who actually have rights, or you can accept that you have to give people in the colony who are non-white rights and make sure that they are not necessarily emancipated, because slavery was a massively profitable industry for France, and with the Republic undergoing a huge economic tumult, it was by and large accepted that slavery would have to continue, even though it was a barbaric institution and inherently hypocritical.
Yeah, definitely. It's also interesting that we see from the colonial perspective as well that it was also politically tactful to grant at the abolition of slavery in 1793, isn't it? With the British presence and the Spanish presence being in Haiti in this time, in the early 1790s, that with the Haitian Revolution beginning in 1791, their presence still being there in 1793, is to impose abolition of slavery so that the British and the Spanish are not so well knit inside the country. So, because having taken over Haiti, the British and the Spanish would reinstitute slavery as a colonial power, just as France did. So it's interesting. And we also see this within the actual politics of the Haitian revolutionaries themselves. We see, obviously, Toussaint Louverture, one of the main revolutionaries in the Haitian Revolution, go from to supporting the Spanish against the French and the British, to defecting to the French, well, not defecting, just changing sides to the French in 1793 because of their imposition of the abolition of slavery. And I think this goes to show that it was highly political, as well as a reluctant nudge towards universal suffrage and universal acceptance of national distinction. So what do you guys think?
I think you're definitely on point there. When it comes to the British and Spanish interference in the colony of Saint-Domingue, the Spanish originally made overtures to the Haitian slave revolt that Toussaint assumed leadership of in the north, and they said that they would recognize the freedom that the Haitian people had won for themselves. So they wouldn't, I don't think they tried to reimpose slavery on those who had freed themselves, but they'd keep the institution around, which is still barbaric. And the British took the complete opposite tack. We made pacts with the Blanc Gland, these white slave owners, to try and reimpose it all. And we
technically, that's a terrible idea, isn't it? Like, it's not politically expedient in the long run at all.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It was a way of gaining control of Saint-Domingue and also milking the colonies in the Caribbean for all they were worth.
You also get a sense that in the National Convention during the height of the revolution in 1793-94, just before the Terror, where we get the Dantonists and the Robespierres and the whole Jacobin lot, and the Mountain, obviously, we get a speech in 1793, actually, from Georges Danton, one of the leading Frenchmen in the French Revolution, saying to the convention that, I quote, "Representatives of the French people, until now our decrees of liberty have been selfish and only for ourselves. But today we proclaim it to the universe, and generations to come will glory in this decree. We are proclaiming universal liberty. We are working to future generations. Let us launch liberty into the colonies, and the English are dead today." So obviously, at the end of that quote, we get a sense that it's obviously political in trying to get rid of the English or the British in Haiti, but it's also, Danton claims, a grudging reluctance to push into an enlightened future, that they're spreading these ideals, these Enlightenment French revolutionary ideals are more important than empire, which is quite radical, obviously. So that's quite interesting.
It really is. It very much encapsulates the power of the French Revolution and that unique spirit represented to the world. It was a final declaration that men could be free and people could be free. It's worth noting, there are figures from France who started to negotiate for the liberation of slaves during the revolt. So Sonthonax, for instance, he's a figure not widely mentioned, but he was a white abolitionist who went to Saint-Domingue as an administrator and then began brokering deals with those who were revolting, like Toussaint, to try and overturn the system of oppression that was going on in Saint-Domingue. The Society of the Friends of the Blacks, a sort of French pressure group that emerged during the revolution to advance the rights of those colonized by France to the assembly and to give them equal representation. It's interesting enough that the independence movements for Saint-Domingue from France initially began with white colonists who felt they were being unnecessarily restricted, not only by the mercantilism of the French government, what with forcing the white colonists to buy all their colonial merchandise from France and sell it directly to France, but also because things like the Code Noir were at the very least trying to restrict institutions like slavery, even if they weren't doing it particularly well. So initially, free non-whites in Haiti, and to a certain extent slaves and former slaves like Toussaint, they viewed France as a mechanism for liberty rather than as a future oppressor to throw off. And although Toussaint eventually did fall out with the French under Napoleon, there's still this idea of the French Republic representing something beneficial to the people that it formerly oppressed as a new institution that was not bound by the barbarism of the old.
Yeah. I do fear that we're tumbling towards a sort of Whiggish history, but it's undeniable. Like it seems that this progression is occurring.
Absolutely. The winds of change. The minute the Haitian Revolution started in 1791, the winds of change for slavery definitely came into full force because it represented an opportunity of those oppressed to rise up and overthrow the people that subjected them to some of the most barbaric treatment ever faced by mankind.
Yes, it is worth noting that the Haitian Revolution is perhaps the most profound of all revolutions during this period. And the people who were treated arguably the worst out of all humanity at this time, the slaves, taking the very lofty ideals of the Enlightenment, applying them to their own situation, it put those ideals to the test in a way that other revolutions arguably did not. And I think that's why the Haitian Revolution has, or rather should have, a singular place in world history. Because prior to this kind of revolt was almost unprecedented in the kind of ideals it was engaging with. And on that note, there's a figure associated with the revolution quite closely that we've mentioned a few times previously, Toussaint Louverture. I think it's worth having a look at him and his life and what he did during the revolution. Does anybody have anything to say about him?
Just for some context, like mild context, he was quite a profound figure in the Haitian Revolution. He was a black ex-slave, revolutionary, obviously. Initially, in the early years, he did fight for the Spanish in Haiti, in the south, I think it was. And obviously, when the French abolished slavery in Haiti, he went over to the French, as I said earlier. And then he went on to consolidate the authority over a lot of the slaves in Haiti. So he was leading in his philosophy, his idea was his political ideas were that he didn't want to secede from the French Empire. Rather, he wanted to remain in the French Empire. It wasn't an issue being within that Francosphere of influence. It was just that they needed a certain extent of self-determination, self-governance, self-determination, and just to be free. And obviously, we see as the Haitian Revolution progresses, it becomes less and less likely that is going to happen within the French Empire. So it was by 1804 they were totally out of it. So they began governing themselves under Toussaint Louverture. He's a very interesting figure because not only did he fight against the colonial powers of the time, namely the French, the Spanish, and the British. He also fought against other sort of slaves, well, not slaves, but other black people in Haiti. So, for example, the War of the Knives in 1799 to 1801, just before Napoleon's influence was fought against him. He actually fought against André Rigaud, who was mixed race, and he was a former plantation owner. This is where Toussaint consolidates his authority over Saint-Domingue. This is where he becomes the sort of leading figure of the Haitian Revolution after that. So this is why it's so prolonged, that it's because in Haiti there are so many factions, not only amongst ex-slaves, slaves, and mixed race people, and the white colonialists. That's why it's so prolonged. This creates Louverture as quite an important figure in this context.
Absolutely, as a black slave who earned his own freedom, and once he cemented that, engendered himself as a fairly respectable member of the community of North Haiti, to then take on this monumental task of organizing revolution. It's perhaps beneficial to give a wee bit of a background to the 1791 uprising. It began with a voodoo ceremony led by an Aungan, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, or a voodoo priest by the name of Dutty Bookman near Le Cap, what's noted to be the result of months of meticulous planning. 8 days after that, plantations across the northern plains were being burned in organized, synchronized attacks, with what started as around 2,000 slaves, but eventually swelled to around 80,000 as they'd burn a plantation and destroy the mechanism of the white owner to make profit off of what are essentially the bodies of slaves and build mercantile empires on their graves. They would free the slaves in the plantation and move onward. They'd often unite with maroons, which is a term for slaves who had absconded from the plantations, or rather freed themselves and managed to throw off the yoke before people like Louverture came along. And Louverture, as you say, he sort of gained control of this revolutionary movement among the slaves and became a prominent leader from a very early stage, and fought all the way to the end of the revolution, especially when it came to dealing with men like Rigaud, who was also a prominent figure in Haiti at the time. André Rigaud, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I'm terrible at French, so I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, André Rigaud, he's this figure who's managed to take over a significant part of southern Haiti. And then I believe when it came to plantations he found had been deserted by terrified white owners, he would take them over and resume operation on them and build up the economy of Haiti in that way. And it's perhaps worth noting that even under revolutionary figures like Toussaint, who's sometimes referred to as the Black Napoleon for his intense political conniving and genuine, unique ability to sort of play the factions of Saint-Domingue off each other, he still kept the plantation system because it was viewed as the only way to make Haiti economically relevant as its export in sugar and coffee and indigo. So even when it comes to revolution, Haiti was still subjugated in a way by colonial powers, by having its only economic resource, its only way of profiting being tied to exploitation and being tied to these wider economies who needed this one resource. Well, not one resource, but these multiple vital resources, coffee, sugar, and indigo.
Well, in addition to Toussaint Louverture, another fascinating figure associated with the early days of the revolt is one Roman La Prophetess.
Yes, Roman La Prophetess is possibly one of the most fascinating figures in, well, the history of the Western world. They started off as Roman Rivière, a free black Creole from the Spanish side of Saint-Domingue. And I believe Creole is a term that denotes someone who's born in the colonies. So records indicate that Roman Rivière purchased 10 carreaux, which is apparently 32 acres of land in Throw-Coffee in July 1784. So they were a landowner, and they purchased this small land that was used for a coffee plantation. Roman then married a slave woman by the name of Marie Rosadan after purchasing her, which is quite messed up. But it turns out that they, in fact, had a relationship before she won her freedom. So the 3 children that he purchased along with Marie Rosadan were his. And I say his at that time because the figure of Roman La Prophetess emerges with the uprising of 1791. As oppression was going to fall down on the plantation of Throw-Coffee, Roman had established himself as a voodoo priest. And voodoo at this point was quite syncretized with Catholicism because of the French-imposed sort of method of trying to convert black people to Christianity, especially the slave population to Christianity. So we ended up getting Roman La Prophetess, someone who identified themselves with the feminine nature of the Virgin Mary in a tradition that's very much reminiscent of West African traditions. I get this from The Priest and the Prophetess, Abbé Ovière, Roman Rivière, and the Revolutionary Atlantic World. This states that by 16th century in West Africa, the spiritual power of gender-inverted male prophets was well established and highly influential. Thus, Roman may very well have taken the title La Prophetess as a reflection of a feminized passivity that made him penetrable by the spirit world, thereby enabling his performance as a medium. Such a gender-fluid state would have made his mediumship resonate with the religious habitus of both his Congolese followers and those who hailed from West Africa, where male possession priests performing as females were and remain also prevailing. So, taking on the title of La Prophetess compared with the Prophet and doing that to emphasize a spiritual tie with the Virgin Mary shows a resonance with the population that was trying to liberate themselves from white rule in Saint-Domingue. And Roman proved to be a very successful revolutionary against not only prevailing social strata by identifying as La Prophetess, which was demonized quite heavily by the French at the time who were fighting against Roman. I believe they disparagingly referred to Roman as a hermaphrodite, among other things. And Roman managed to seize and take the city of Léogane after successfully fighting off French attacks on Trocoufie, the plantation.
What do you think about the significance then of, as you said, this sort of hermaphrodite perception of the prophetess?
I think it shows a very interesting societal division between European societies and African societies. And obviously, I'm a white guy. I'm not very well versed on African societies beyond the impacts of colonialism on our societies. And even that, I'm not particularly well versed in that. So it's a thing that's not well studied here in European societies, I think.
Yeah.
We don't know much about indigenous West African cultures and African cultures. So I figure, and obviously during the height of slavery, where they're much, much, much more racist than modern societies, even though it could be argued modern societies are still quite racist. They're definitely not going to understand something like that, and definitely not going to have any cultural tolerance whatsoever for a figure like Roman La Prophetess. So they would probably have been viewed as very, very strange, the epitome of this sort of foreign threat that was kept under lock and chain as a production mechanism, essentially, by colonial producers. This manifestation of the alien threat posed by the slaves to the white plantation owner.
Would you say it contributed as a sort of, as a cultural rallying point?
Absolutely. It certainly seems that way to me, that Roman La Prophetess would be viewed as a cultural rallying point for the slave population of Saint-Domingue. Because it's this cultural tie back to the homeland that they were unfairly ripped from.
Yeah.
They proved to be a very successful revolutionary because they managed to seize and govern the city of Léogane for a significant amount of time before being captured and executed, unfortunately. But the fact that you can see figures like this starting to emerge shows the absolute revolutionary nature of the Haitian Revolution, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, the third and final of the revolutionary figures we'll be looking at is one Jean-Jacques Dessaline, whose career coincides with the end of the revolution, and he is regarded along with Toussaint Louverture as one of the founding fathers of the Haitian state. And unlike Toussaint Louverture, he does have a certain amount of controversy associated with his career, so we'll perhaps navigate that now. So does anybody have anything to say about Dessaline, his legacy, his actions?
Perhaps some context for the figure of Dessaline. His career started growing under the guidance of Toussaint Louverture, because when Toussaint started opposing Napoleon, and declaring himself governor for life of Saint-Domingue, he did institute quite a brutal regime. He was going to keep cultivars, freed black slaves, that they would have to keep working on the plantations for the sake of the economy. So even though they were free, they were still under a mechanism of oppression. Toussaint, highly militarized society, and Dessaline is a product of that. He grew up to be Toussaint's enforcer in a way. And so once Toussaint had made a political misstep, it was Dessaline who stepped in to relieve him of his position, which led to Toussaint, I believe, dying in prison. And then Dessaline takes hold of the revolution and opposes the Leclerc expedition under Napoleon, which was sent to reimpose slavery in Saint-Domingue. So once it came to this, you got this magnificent emancipation of the slaves and this large-scale benefit of the French Revolution on Haiti, and it's overturned the minute Napoleon takes power from the Directorate and tries to impose the old colonial social strata back on the people of Saint-Domingue. And Dessaline triumphed over the Leclerc expedition, and after that tried to annex the eastern part of the island of Hispaniola, which had been ceded to the French. He failed in this, but successfully secured Haitian independence, and in 1805 wrote the Constitution of Haiti, which is the second free constitution in the Western colonial world. He was a fascinating figure. Unfortunately, there are some very grim facts to his rise to power and rule.
Well, on that note, it would be remiss of us to not speak of the final coup de grace of the Haitian Revolution, which was the 1804 event called the Massacre of the French, ordered by Dessaline. And it's this event more than anything else that has affected perceptions of the Haitian Revolution more than, particularly in Western countries, more than any other. Now, obviously, there are many different opinions about this, but do we have anything to say about maybe its motivations or its impact?
Obviously, it's Napoleon's. Okay, so in France, in 1791 to 1804, it's a very vast period in revolutionary terms, as you probably know. So a lot changes politically and internally within France. So the regime changes many times. So like in the early 1789 to 1793, we get a constitutional monarchy. After 1793, we get the terror, the Jacobin terror. And then after that, we get a number of republics. And also we get to, obviously, Napoleon's consulate. So in 1804, the UK's crowned emperor is, we get Napoleon's own regime. So we get a purely Napoleonic regime that is imposed on Haiti, which is unprecedented. Though French presence is precedented, this regime isn't. So obviously we get with it the reinstitution of slavery, which was a whole sort of central reason that the early years of the revolution occurred. So obviously we get the sense that the European colonialists, to Haitian eyes, is very fickle, and it changes so much due to the constant regime changes. And I think that has something to do with it, really, in sort of resisting this new regime change in the 1804 massacre. So what do you guys think? Is there any other factors you reckon?
One of the things that strikes me about the final years of the war is the surprise of the French when they found out how strongly the Haitians were resisting their attempt to reimpose slavery. There was a genuine conceit among the French officers and the administrators that the Haitians enjoyed being their slaves. I know it's ridiculous to us, but to them, they just saw it as the most natural thing in the world. They couldn't conceive of anything different. When the Haitians resisted so stoutly, that really hammered home to them that things could not go back to being the way they were. And for the Haitians, the prospect of a return to slavery was appalling. One of the main reasons why the remaining whites in the colony were massacred rather than simply expelled. And Dessaline's rationalisation was that he was worried that they would simply go back to France or Spain or Britain, raise another army, return and try and reimpose slavery. So while we may see the massacre as appalling, morally deplorable, in a way it did represent a final demarcation line, this far no further. The Haitians would not under any circumstances accept reimposition of slavery or white rule or European rule. And in a way it achieved the effect that Dessaline wished it to have. It shocked European countries, it shocked the United States. It was a complete upset of what they saw as the social order. And yet, at the same time, what was happening to the whites was something that the whites had been doing to the blacks for many, many centuries prior to this time.
I think in the context of the utter brutality of the regime in Saint-Domingue and the regime of slavery, the massacre was no worse than the imposition of slavery and the barbaric conditions perpetuated in the colony in the first place. I believe it's said in the Black Jacobins that it would have justified a massacre 3 times over. It's a very, very grim thing to acknowledge, but no grimmer than any of the things that happened during the Haitian Revolution, and certainly no more grim than the mass displacement of black people from Africa to be enslaved in the colonies.
It's worth noting that none of this excuses mass killings of any kind,
Absolutely
but it does at the very least explain it. And as a further note to it, in America, the massacre was fairly well known. The horrors of Saint-Domingue, it was called in the American translation of the colony's name. And in a way, it had an unfortunate effect on American politics because a lot of white Southern congressmen from slave-owning states would very regularly refer to the massacre of 1804 as a prospect for the United States if the United States would abolish slavery. Now, obviously, that's a ridiculous argument, but nonetheless, it was one that was very often held up as good justification for America keeping slavery, the fear of a black revenge for mistreatment. Now, obviously, this is unfortunate, but it's certainly not the fault of the Haitians, as some people have suggested. And the massacre, further to that, led to a general shunning of Haiti in the years after its independence. The United States refused ever to recognize it until after the Civil War, again, mainly at the insistence of white congressmen. Even South American countries whom Haiti had supported in their fight for independence were very cold on recognizing Haiti. So in a way, Haiti was almost punished in a way for this original sin that was to be a country that refused to be subdued, refused to be beaten down. And the effect that's had on the Haitian economy, Haitian government in the centuries after independence has been quite detrimental in many ways. So on that note, do we have any more reflections on the revolution in the context of modern historiography and perhaps any relevance it would have to modern day political discourse?
Well, I think, one of the reasons we spoke about doing this topic today, this podcast, was that obviously it's a reflection on the colonial past in regards to the current political climate, especially with events going on in the US. So I think this podcast is a sort of reflection into the colonial past and a look into the sort of reality of the different forms of oppression that can occur, which obviously are here today as well. So back then, it was a direct confrontation with these forms of their contemporary forms of slave oppression, and now we're coming to certain other types of more subtle forms nowadays. So I think it's worth noting that this sort of podcast is an investigation into looking back at the colonial past, looking into these realities and looking at the evolution of how they've changed, and that today it's still a serious horror in the modern world that should not be happening, but regrettably is.
Absolutely. It's racism, although many people have seen it to have largely disappeared, still persists in a variety of insidious ways that casts a veil over a large part of society. And it's often contended that it's a fight that's been won. But the reality in the US and the reality here as well shows that it's a fight very far from winning, and that the atrocities of the colonial past cast a spectre over Europe and over the Western world as a whole.
Well, as one final note, I think if the history of slavery and the reactions to it from those oppressed tells anything, is that violence breeds violence.
Yeah, certainly.
And the way to fix the problem is to eliminate the violence at the root. So I suppose the greatest hope of any historian is that in the future we will treat each other more kindly, having recognised our mistakes in the past. We will eliminate the need for any kind of violent revolt, and we'll learn to treat our fellow human beings with a level of dignity and respect that all human life is due. Anything more to add?
I think that's it.
Well, this brings to an end our investigation on the Haitian Revolution. Very much hope you've enjoyed it. New episodes coming soon. Goodbye.